Take one. Action.
Hello, we're here with Maria Caulfield to talk about a debate to commemorate the 100th year of women getting the vote and other topical issues.
The aim of the debate was to find an inspiring woman who embodies our school motto, everyone the best they can be, to represent Chailey School. And the big question is, who did you pick?
Oh, well, me and Miss Keys, we kind of chickened out a bit, so we chose two women. So we chose one for a previous generation, and for us, it was, or for me, it was Marie Curie. And the presentation was excellent by Ella and Alice, because I worked in cancer nursing before I became an MP, and so the work that Marie Curie did, I was using on a daily basis as a nurse, doing x-rays on patients, giving them radiotherapy, and she really truly saved millions of lives at a time when women couldn't even vote, couldn't even go to school. So she really is someone who's not just transformed the world for women, but for the world for millions of people. And so I was particularly keen to choose her. But we also chose a young lady who will inspire the next generation. We chose Malala as well, presented by Katia and Holly, because I think in the years to come, people will look back at her struggle to get education for women, because there's millions of girls around the world right now who, unlike you here in Chailey, can't go to school, can't access education, and if they try, are persecuted as a result. So she's a huge role model for young girls across the world, and I think we'll look back at her achievements in the years to come with immense pride. So we chose two fabulous women.
And why do you think feminism is important?
I think feminism is important because women, you know, my grandmother, for example, couldn't vote. When women first got the vote 100 years ago, you know, that was a big move. But even then, my grandmother, because she didn't own property, had to wait another 10 years to get the vote. So she wasn't able to get the vote 100 years ago. And to think what has happened in those 100 years, that we now are in a country where women can come to school freely, that you'll be able to vote in elections, that we've got a female Prime Minister. You know, women have come a long way, and I think it makes a difference. Having women involved, we're 50% of the population, so we should be able to have an equal say and contribute equally. But I think the world's a better place when men and women are making the decisions. You know, even at home, if you're living at home with mum and dad, you know, you wouldn't let dad make all the decisions, and likewise, you know, why in the rest of the world would we let men make all the decisions? And we just make different decisions, and we complement each other. We're not better, we're not worse, but we need both sides, both the female decision making and the male decision making, to come together. And I think we've seen, since women have got involved in politics, there's been less conflict in the world, and I think that's a good thing.
Do you think that school meals are too expensive in secondary schools?
Well, school meals, I mean, when I was going to school, school meals were never that good. And I think, you know, now when I come to schools, I see the amazing food that you have on offer. It's much better than my school dinners that I used to get. But they are expensive, and it is an issue. And only this week we were having a debate in Parliament on free school meals. And we've changed the rules slightly so that we can offer free school meals to more children, because it is a challenge, and you know, we want everyone to be able to access free school meals or access school meals, and for those who can't afford it, for those to be free. Because for some children in this country, that's often the only hot meal they'll get during the day. So it's really important that when you come to school, you've got the right food to give you the energy to study, to learn, to be able to play. So school meals are an important issue, and I'm hoping as time goes on, we won't be just looking at lunch meals, we'll be looking at breakfast as well.
Have you ever been discriminated against as a woman in Parliament?
I'd probably say no. I think we're very lucky in our generation that we're starting to see real equality coming through. But I know many MPs in the House of Commons, and I think of someone like Cheryl Gillam, or someone like Harriet Harman, who's what we call the mother of the House. So she's not the oldest, but she's the longest serving female MP who's currently sitting in the House of Commons, so we call her the mother of the House. And when they tell their stories of when they first got into Parliament, it was a very different place, and there wasn't even you know, equal access to bathroom facilities, or even equal access to office space. and that has changed dramatically. So I personally haven't, but the reason I haven't is because the women that have gone before me have fought very hard to make sure that we've got equal rights. So there's still a lot to do. I would say government, national government, so Westminster, is probably better than local government. So if you look at your local councils, there's still far more men on those councils than there are women, and actually that's probably a good place to start in terms of making some changes.
What do you think of the housing situation in this country for the homeless people? Are you doing enough in the planning system to provide new housing, as the local council seems very slow in approving local housing developments?
Well, that's a very good question. Housing is a big issue, and we do need more housing, because for young people like yourselves, when you want to go and rent or buy your first home, we need to make sure that there's enough housing there available, because when there's a shortage of housing, that puts rents up and it puts house prices up if you want to buy. So building more housing is important. But I know from my experience of an MP, when a planning application goes forward to build new housing, lots of people object if it's close to them, because they love the green open space because we've got so much around us. So it's a very challenging thing to get a planning application through, and that's why it takes such a long time. But we absolutely do need to build more housing. There's a new development happening in Lewes called the North Street Quarter, which will build hundreds of more homes locally, which will be a good thing. But just to tackle the issue of homelessness, the new legislation the government's bringing through, because one of the things we find is for people who often find themselves homeless, it's not just about the accommodation. For many people who are homeless, there are reasons they're homeless, and they may have problems with drug and alcohol addiction, they may have mental health problems, and so we need to be tackling the reason why they're homeless. It's often not just about the accommodation. And so the government's bringing in more funding at the moment into mental health, into drug and alcohol abuse, into domestic violence, for example. There's lots of women who have to flee their home because of domestic violence, and next week we're bringing in new legislation to support women, to give them secure tenancies, so if they flee a domestic violence situation, they've got a safe, secure place to go to. So there's a lot of work to be done around the cause of homelessness, and I think for too long we've really concentrated on the actual buildings themselves rather than the people and the reasons why they're struggling. So there is a lot of work to be done, you're quite right.
Even in this day and age, the gender pay gap is real, and I think it's a real shame. But the question is, what are the government doing to prevent this happening in the future?
Yeah, there is a huge problem with the gender pay gap, which is the difference between what women earn in the workplace compared to the men. It's getting better. So for younger women, up till really the age of 30, there isn't really much of a gender pay gap. But once women start having children and taking time off, or maybe having other caring responsibilities for parents or grandparents, that's when we would start to see that gap suddenly widen, because women come back to work part-time, maybe change jobs and take on a job that doesn't pay as much to do that. And so that's the issues we need to look at, is things like maternity discrimination and protecting women's working rights when they do take a break from work. But we also need to tackle equal pay. So that's the issue where men and women are paid differently, or women are paid less for doing exactly the same job. And if you look at some of the stories around the BBC, for example, which have hit the headlines recently, you will see that there's, for reporters such as yourself, there are women reporters on the BBC who are being paid much less for doing exactly the same job as a male reporter. And if we are making all companies who employ more than 250 people from this April publish all their pay figures, so we can spot the companies where that is happening. So it's not just the BBC, they're a good example, but all big companies from April will have to publish their figures. And I think once we shine a light on who's not paying staff equally, we can make them change.
What do you think of the Chailey school transport situation for students living in rural villages? As I personally got declined by East Sussex County Council as their transport was full, and no other provisions were required, as I was not the only one needing a secure way to school, as people like me can't walk to school due to having any paths and high speed limits.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good question, because in rural areas such as this, I think we often get forgotten sometimes compared to some of the urban areas like Brighton and Hove or Hastings or Crawley. There's real issues about getting to school, and there are some pieces of work. So the first thing I would say is, if someone has been declined by East Sussex, do contact me as your local MP. That's one of my jobs, is to help residents when they face issues like this, and I can certainly speak to the council on your behalf. But also we are working with community transport schemes. So there's a scheme called CTLA, which is Community Transport for the Lewes area, which is run by volunteers, and they provide transport for all groups of people. So people who haven't got their own car in rural villages, who need to go for a hospital appointment, or to see their GP, or to get shopping, or for young people who are trying to get to school. So we are setting up some new schemes with them. They get some grants from government, they get some grants from the local councils, and they use volunteers, and they are making a huge difference. So if there's a particular issue in the area, we can certainly speak to community transport groups to provide transport, but in specific cases, contact me, because we can often help.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you both. You've done Mercedes and Sophie. I've done many interviews, but that's probably one of the toughest I've done, so well done.
There'll be 2 boys that will be coming to interview next.
Okay, so boys, if you want to switch